Jordan Reyes was folding laundry in her cramped apartment when the explosions began. The windows rattled, and she could see black smoke rising from Fort Davidson just 3 miles away. What she didn't know was that 17 soldiers lay bleeding in the rubble of what was supposed to be a routine training exercise. She didn't know that in the next 6 hours, she would defy every protocol, cross military barriers, and risk everything to save lives. And she certainly didn't know that her own hospital would suspend her the very next morning, calling her actions reckless and dangerous. But what happened after that? When a black SUV pulled up outside her apartment with Pentagon officials inside, would change everything she thought she knew about courage, consequence, and what it truly means to serve. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Jordan had always been the type of nurse who couldn't ignore suffering. Even off-duty, even when exhaustion weighed heavy on her shoulders after 12-hour shifts at St. Mary's General Hospital, she found herself stopping for every accident, every fallen jogger, every elderly person who looked unsteady on their feet. Her colleagues teased her about it, calling her the Florence Nightingale of downtown Portland. But Jordan knew it wasn't some noble calling that drove her. It was something deeper, more visceral, a physical inability to walk past someone in pain. On that Tuesday morning in late September, she had finally gotten a day off after working 6 consecutive shifts in the emergency department. The apartment felt too quiet, too still after the constant chaos of the hospital, so she busied herself with mundane tasks, trying to convince her adrenaline-trained body that it was okay to rest. The laundry basket sat on her kitchen table, filled with scrubs that still smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee, the uniform of someone who had chosen to spend their life in the spaces between life and death. The first explosion came at 11:47 a.m. Jordan's hands stilled on the blue scrub top she was folding, as the windows of her third-floor apartment shook in their frames. Living so close to Fort Davidson meant occasional training noises were normal, but this was different. This sound carried weight, carried wrongness, carried the kind of deep bass note that spoke of things going terribly, catastrophically awry. She moved to the window, pressing her face against the glass, and saw what would later be described in military reports as the result of multiple system failures during a joint training exercise involving explosive ordnance disposal and urban warfare scenarios. What Jordan saw was simply smoke, thick and black, rising from the direction of the base, like a dark pillar against the crisp autumn sky. Her phone buzzed. The text from her friend Marcus, who worked base security. Training accident. Bad one. All civilian medical on standby. Jordan stared at the message, her nurse's instincts already calculating response times, resource allocation, the logistics of mass casualties. St. Mary's was the closest Level 1 trauma center, and she knew they would be overwhelmed if this was as serious as it looked. She also knew they had called in all available staff, which meant her colleagues were probably already racing toward the hospital, leaving their own laundry baskets and quiet mornings behind. The second explosion came 10 minutes later, closer this time, close enough that her neighbor's car alarm began wailing in the parking lot below. Jordan grabbed her keys without conscious thought, muscle memory from years of emergency response overriding any rational consideration of protocols or procedures. She threw on the first clothes she found, jeans and a St. Mary's t-shirt from a charity run, and was out the door before she could second-guess herself. The drive toward Fort Davidson felt surreal, like moving through a disaster movie where she was both participant and observer. Emergency vehicles screamed past her small Honda Civic, their lights painting red and blue streaks across her windshield. The closer she got to the base, the more vehicles she saw pulled over on the shoulder, their occupants standing outside, phone cameras pointed toward the growing column of smoke. The base's main entrance was chaos. Military personnel in camouflage uniforms formed barriers with their bodies and vehicles, keeping civilians back while shouting orders that Jordan couldn't quite hear over the noise of helicopters and sirens. She parked as close as she could and approached on foot, her hospital ID badge hanging around her neck out of habit. "Ma'am, you need to stay back," a young soldier called out, his voice tight with stress. His uniform bore the name Collins, and Jordan could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "I'm a nurse," Jordan said, holding up her ID. "Emergency department at St. Mary's. How many casualties?" Collins glanced at her badge, then back at the smoke rising beyond the barriers. "Ma'am, we have medical personnel en route. You need to maintain distance for your own safety." "How many?" Jordan asked again, and this time her voice carried the authority she had learned working night shifts in the ER, the tone that cut through panic and demanded straight answers. "We don't have confirmed numbers yet," Collins admitted, and Jordan could see the conflict in his young face, the desire to give information warring with his orders to maintain the perimeter. Through the barrier, Jordan could see military ambulances moving in and out of the smoke, their emergency lights creating a strobe effect that made the scene feel even more unreal. She counted vehicles, estimated capacity, did the kind of rapid math that emergency healthcare workers learn to do without thinking. Too many ambulances for a minor incident. Not enough for something truly catastrophic. Which meant somewhere in between. Which meant people bleeding, people suffering, people who needed more hands than were available. "Listen," she said to Collins, stepping closer to the barrier. "I've been doing emergency medicine for 8 years. I've worked mass casualties before. If you have wounded people in there and not enough medics, I can help." Collins shook his head. "Ma'am, I can't authorize civilians beyond this point. Orders from command." Jordan understood orders. She understood protocols and procedures, and the careful bureaucracy that kept institutions functioning. She also understood that sometimes protocols were obstacles to be navigated, rather than rules to be followed. She had learned this lesson working holiday shifts when the ER was understaffed, during flu seasons when normal procedures would have meant people dying in waiting rooms, during the small everyday emergencies when doing the right thing meant bending the rules. The third explosion was different from the first two. Instead of the deep, rumbling bass notes of the earlier blasts, this one cracked like thunder, sharp and immediate, and Jordan saw Collins flinch as debris rained down beyond the smoke line. "Jesus," Collins muttered, and Jordan saw him touch his radio. "Control, this is Perimeter East. We have secondary explosions. Request updated casualty count." The radio crackled with static and overlapping voices, the kind of communication breakdown that Jordan recognized from her own workplace during crisis situations. Too much information, too many people talking, not enough clear direction. "Control, Perimeter East. Say again, casualty count," Collins repeated into his radio. More static. Then, finally, a voice. "Perimeter East, we have 17 confirmed wounded, multiple critical. Medical teams are spread thin. ETA on additional ambulances is 20 minutes. 17 wounded, multiple critical, 20 minutes for additional resources." Jordan's mind automatically began triage calculations. In 20 minutes, critical patients could become deceased patients. In 20 minutes, treatable injuries could become permanent disabilities. In 20 minutes, 17 families could receive phone calls that would shatter their worlds. She looked at Collins, saw the same calculations running behind his eyes. He was young, maybe 22, probably newer to crisis management than she was. His orders were clear, but his humanity was equally clear. "Private Collins," Jordan said, reading his name tape again. "What's your first name?" "David," he said automatically, then looked surprised that he had answered. "David, I need you to make a command decision here. You have 17 wounded soldiers beyond that barrier, and medical teams that are spread thin. I am a qualified emergency nurse with mass casualty experience. I can help save lives." David Collins looked at her hospital ID again, then at the smoke rising behind him, then back at her face. Jordan could see the moment when his training warred with his instinct, when protocol battled with the simple human recognition that people were suffering and help was standing right in front of him. "I can't officially authorize you to cross the perimeter," he said carefully. "I understand," Jordan replied. "And if you were to somehow get beyond the barrier, I would have to report that as a security breach." "I understand that too." David Collins looked at her for a long moment, then deliberately turned his attention to his radio, pressing the button to check for updates from command. While his attention was focused on the static-filled communication, Jordan slipped past the concrete barriers and jogged toward the smoke. The scene beyond the perimeter was worse than she had imagined from the distant view. What had been a mock urban warfare training area was now a landscape of twisted metal and concrete debris. Training buildings designed to simulate Middle Eastern architecture were partially collapsed, their facades blown away to reveal the skeletal frameworks beneath. The acrid smell of explosive residue mixed with dust and something else Jordan's experienced nose recognized immediately: the metallic scent of blood. Military medics moved through the rubble like ants, their movements purposeful but clearly overwhelmed. Jordan could see soldiers sitting or lying in various states of injury, some conscious and alert, others ominously still. The organized triage system she had expected was more like controlled chaos, with medics making rapid decisions about who to treat first, while simultaneously trying to coordinate evacuation. Priorities. A staff sergeant with medical insignia saw her approaching and held up a hand. "Ma'am, this is a restricted area. You need to get back behind the barriers." Jordan held up her hospital ID. "I'm an ER nurse from St. Mary's. I heard you have casualties." The sergeant, whose name tape read Rodriguez, looked at her ID and then at the scene around them. Jordan could see him making the same calculations she had made, weighing protocol against need. "You have trauma experience?" Rodriguez asked. 8 years emergency medicine, including mass casualty situations," Jordan replied. "I'm certified in ACLS, PALS, and ATLs." Rodriguez nodded once, sharply. "We've got 17 wounded, ranging from minor to critical. 3 are priority 1, 2 are borderline. We're short on hands and the next wave of ambulances won't be here for 15 minutes. What do you ask? Need me to do?" Rodriguez pointed toward a section of collapsed training structure, where Jordan could see 2 medics working over prone figures. "Martinez and Johnson are handling the priority 1s. I need someone to assess and stabilize the priority 2s over there." He gestured toward a group of soldiers sitting against what remained of a concrete wall. "Check airway, breathing, circulation. Start IV if you can. We've got supplies staged over by that Humvee." Jordan nodded and jogged toward the supply area, her mind already shifting into the focused, analytical mode that she had learned to enter during emergencies. The chaos around her faded into background noise as she mentally cataloged the equipment available. The 4th bags and tubing, trauma dressings, splinting materials, basic medications. Not the sophisticated equipment of her hospital emergency department, but enough to keep people alive long enough to get them to definitive care. The first soldier she reached was conscious but pale, his left arm held at an unnatural angle. His name tape read Patterson, and his eyes tracked her movement as she knelt beside him. "I'm Jordan. I'm a nurse," she said, automatically falling into the calm, reassuring tone she used with trauma patients. "What's your name?" "Corporal Patterson," he replied, his voice tight with pain. "My arm. It's pretty messed up." Jordan could see that Patterson's left forearm showed obvious signs of fracture, with swelling and deformity that suggested both radius and ulna breaks. But her first concern was always the ABCs: airway, breathing, circulation. "Patterson, I need you to take a deep breath from me," she said, watching his chest rise and fall, noting the rhythm and depth. No obvious respiratory distress. "Any trouble breathing? Any pain in your chest?" "No, just the arm." Jordan's hands moved quickly but gently, checking his pulse, assessing skin color and temperature, looking for signs of shock or internal bleeding. Patterson's vital signs seemed stable, which moved him down her mental triage list. The arm was painful and needed attention, but it wasn't immediately life-threatening. "I'm going to check on a couple of other people first, then come back and get you set up with some pain medication and a proper splint," she told him. "Are you okay to wait a few minutes?" Patterson nodded, and Jordan moved to the next soldier, a young woman whose name tape read Garcia. Garcia was conscious, but holding a blood-soaked bandage against her thigh, and Jordan immediately noticed the pale, sweaty complexion that suggested significant blood loss. "Garcia, I'm Jordan. I'm a nurse. How are you feeling?" "Dizzy," Garcia admitted. "And cold." Jordan gently moved Garcia's hands away from the bandage, noting the amount of blood that had soaked through. The wound appeared to be a laceration rather than a puncture, which was both good and bad news. Good because lacerations were generally easier to control than puncture wounds. Bad because the amount of bleeding suggested it might have hit a significant blood vessel. "I need to get in the fourth started on you and get this bleeding controlled," Jordan told Garcia, already reaching for supplies. "Had you been injured anywhere else?" "I don't think so. Just the leg." Jordan quickly established the fourth access in Garcia's right arm, noting how difficult it was to find a vein due to the blood loss. As saline began flowing, she focused on the leg wound, applying direct pressure with fresh trauma dressings. "Garcia, what happened here?" Jordan asked, both to keep her patient conscious and alert and to better understand the mechanism of injury. "The charges went off too close together," Garcia said, her voice growing stronger as the fourth fluids began to help. "Something went wrong with the timing sequence. The blast knocked me into some metal debris." Jordan nodded, processing this information. Blast injuries could be deceptive, with internal damage that wasn't immediately apparent. She made a mental note to mention this to the medics when Garcia was evacuated. The bleeding from Garcia's thigh wound began to slow under pressure, and Jordan quickly applied a pressure bandage that would hold until she could be transported to the hospital. She helped Garcia into a more comfortable position and moved on to the next soldier. For the next 4 hours, Jordan worked her way through the casualties, moving from patient to patient in a rhythm that felt both foreign and familiar. Foreign because she was working in debris and dust instead of sterile emergency rooms, with limited supplies instead of the full resources of a modern hospital. Familiar because the core of the work remained the same: assess, stabilize, prioritize, move on. She splinted Patterson's arm after administering pain medication, noting that he would need surgical reduction of the fractures, but that the injury was stable for transport. She started a second, the fourth on Garcia, when the first one infiltrated, and upgraded her to priority status when her blood pressure began dropping despite fluid resuscitation. She treated a soldier named Brooks for a concussion and possible skull fracture, keeping him immobilized and monitoring his neurological status. She helped evacuate a soldier whose name she never learned, but whose sucking chest wound required immediate decompression and transport to the trauma center. The work was exhausting in a way that hospital nursing rarely was. In the ER, she had teams of colleagues, sophisticated monitoring equipment, immediate access to specialists, and advanced interventions. Here, she was often working alone or with minimally trained personnel, making critical decisions without the safety net of immediate backup. But there was something deeply satisfying about the work as well. In the hospital, she was one part of a large, complex system. Here, her decisions and actions had immediate, visible impact. When she controlled bleeding, she could see color return to a patient's face. When she splinted a fracture, she could see pain relief in their eyes. When she started in the fourth on a dehydrated soldier, she could watch their vital signs improve in real time. As the afternoon wore on, the initial chaos of the scene began to organize into something more systematic. Additional medical personnel arrived, including a full trauma team from the base hospital. Helicopter evacuations began for the most critical patients, with Jordan helping to prepare patients for transport and providing handoff reports to the flight medics. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez found her as she was finishing an assessment on one of the last remaining patients, a soldier with multiple minor lacerations, who had been waiting patiently while more serious injuries were addressed. "Nurse Reyes," Rodriguez said, and Jordan looked up in surprise. She hadn't told him her last name. "How did you know?" Rodriguez held up her hospital ID badge, which had apparently fallen off at some point during the afternoon. "You dropped this a few hours ago. I wanted to make sure you got it back." Jordan took the badge and clipped it back onto her shirt. "How are we doing overall?" "All 17 casualties are stabilized and either evacuated or ready for evacuation," Rodriguez said. "We had 0 fatalities, which is pretty remarkable given the nature of the accident." "What caused it?" Rodriguez looked around the debris field, his expression grim. "Preliminary investigation suggests multiple system failures in the explosive timing sequences. What should have been controlled, sequential detonations, became essentially simultaneous explosions." "Very lucky," No one was killed. Jordan nodded, looking around at the scene that had consumed her afternoon. In a few hours, cleanup crews would begin removing the debris. Investigators would examine the blast patterns and equipment failures, and reports would be written about lessons learned and protocols to be modified. The human cost of the accident would be measured in recovery times and medical bills, and perhaps some career impacts for personnel who might not return to full duty. But 17 families would get phone calls tonight from soldiers who were injured but alive. 17 soldiers would wake up tomorrow in hospital beds instead of morgues. Jordan felt a familiar sense of satisfaction, the feeling that came from work that mattered, from using her skills and training to make a real difference in real people's lives. "Nurse Reyes," Rodriguez said, "I need to ask you something. Are you authorized to be here?" Jordan felt her stomach tighten. In the intensity of the medical work, she had almost forgotten that she had essentially broken into a restricted military facility. "No," she admitted. "I crossed the perimeter without, authorization." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "I figured. Private Collins at the East Perimeter reported a security breach about the time you showed up. Am I in trouble?" "That's above my pay grade," Rodriguez said. "But I can tell you that your unauthorized assistance probably saved lives today. These soldiers received faster, better care because you were here." As the last ambulance pulled away carrying the final casualties, Jordan found herself standing in the settling dust, suddenly aware of her exhaustion. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the afternoon was wearing off, leaving behind sore muscles, dehydration, and the kind of bone-deep tiredness that came from hours of intense focus. A military police officer approached her, his expression neutral but not unfriendly. "Ms. Reyes, I'm going to need you to come with me for debriefing." The debriefing took place in a small office in the base administration building, with Jordan sitting across from an MP lieutenant whose questions were thorough but not accusatory. She explained how she had learned about the accident, how she had gotten past the perimeter, and what she had done once she was inside. The lieutenant took careful notes and had her sign a statement describing her actions. "Am I going to be charged with anything?" Jordan asked. "That's not my decision to make," the lieutenant replied. "But I can tell you that your statement will be forwarded up the chain of command, along with reports from the medical personnel who worked with you today." By the time Jordan was released, it was nearly sunset. The drive back to her apartment felt surreal, like returning to normal life after spending time in an alternate reality. The streets looked the same, the traffic lights worked the same way. People were still going about their ordinary Tuesday evening activities. But Jordan felt fundamentally changed by the day's events. As if she had crossed some invisible threshold and couldn't quite find her way back to the person she had been that morning. Her apartment looked exactly as she had left it. The laundry basket still sitting on the kitchen table, the scrub still half folded. The quiet stillness that had driven her out of the apartment now feeling almost alien. She sat on her couch and stared at her hands, noting the cuts and scrapes she had accumulated during the day. The dirt under her fingernails that spoke of working in rubble and dust, instead of sterile hospital corridors. She was too tired to cook, too wired to sleep, too emotionally drained to do much of anything except sit and process what had happened. She had helped save 17 lives today. She had also violated security protocols, left her assigned post without authorization, and potentially exposed herself to legal consequences that she didn't fully understand. The phone call came at 7:23 p.m. Jordan saw St. Mary's Hospital displayed on the caller ID and felt her stomach clench with anticipation. "Jordan, this is Margaret Chen," said the voice on the other end. Margaret was the ER director, Jordan's immediate supervisor, and someone Jordan respected both professionally and personally. "Hi, Margaret," Jordan said, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Jordan, I need you to come in tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. I need to see you in my office." "Okay. Can you tell me what this is about?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "We received a call from Fort Davidson this afternoon about your actions during the training accident." Jordan felt her heart rate increase. "I see. Jordan, I need you to know that this is serious. We'll discuss it tomorrow morning." After hanging up, Jordan sat in her darkening apartment, and tried to prepare herself for the conversation she would have with Margaret in the morning. She knew she had violated hospital policy by leaving her assigned location without press authorization. She knew she had potentially exposed the hospital to liability by providing medical care outside of her scope of employment. She also knew she would make the same choice again if faced with the same situation. Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of explosions and bleeding soldiers, and endless forms to fill out explaining her actions. Jordan woke before her alarm, showered, and dressed carefully for what might be her last day as an employee of St. Mary's Hospital. Margaret Chen's office was a testament to organized efficiency, with medical journals stacked neatly on shelves, framed to see, certificates on the walls, and a desk that was clear except for a single manila folder. Jordan recognized the folder as the type used for personnel actions, and she felt her mouth go dry. "Sit down, Jordan," Margaret said, her tone neutral and professional. Jordan sat, clasping her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. "I received a call yesterday afternoon from the commanding officer at Fort Davidson," Margaret began. "He informed me that one of our nurses had provided unauthorized medical assistance during a training accident." Jordan nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. "He also informed me that this nurse had crossed military security barriers without authorization, had worked in a potentially dangerous environment without proper safety clearance, and had provided medical care outside the scope of her employment with this hospital." "That's correct," Jordan managed to say. Margaret opened the manila folder and withdrew a single sheet of paper. "Jordan, what you did yesterday violated several hospital policies. You left your assigned location without authorization. You provided medical care while not officially on duty, potentially exposing the hospital to liability issues. You placed yourself in physical danger without proper safety protocols." Jordan felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. 8 years of building her career, 8 years of reputation and relationships and professional growth, about to end because she couldn't walk away from bleeding soldiers. "However," Margaret continued, and Jordan's head snapped up at the unexpected word, "the commanding officer also informed me that your actions probably saved lives. That your skill and professionalism under extremely difficult circumstances reflected positively on your training and on this institution." Jordan blinked, confused by the mixed message. Margaret picked up the paper from the folder. "Jordan, I am required to formally reprimand you for violating hospital policy. This reprimand will be placed in your personnel file, and you are being suspended without pay for 3 days." Jordan felt the room spin slightly. Suspended. It was better than being fired, but it was still a significant professional consequence. "I understand," Jordan said quietly. "However," Margaret said again, "I want you to know that personally, I am proud of what you did yesterday. As a nurse, as a human being, you saw people who needed help, and you helped them. That's why we became nurses in the first place." Margaret stood up and walked around her desk, extending her hand to Jordan. "Take your 3 days, think about what happened, and then come back to work. We need nurses like you." Jordan shook Margaret's hand, still processing the mixed emotions of being both punished and praised for the same actions. She was gathering her things to leave when Margaret's secretary knocked on the door. "Excuse me, Ms. Chen, but there are some men here to see Ms. Reyes. They say they're from the Pentagon." Jordan felt the blood drain from her face. Pentagon officials wanting to see her could not be good news. She was probably going to be arrested for violating military security, or charged with interfering with a government operation, or prosecuted under some federal law she had never heard of. "Send them in," Margaret said, looking as surprised as Jordan felt. 2 men in dark suits entered the office, their bearing and demeanor immediately recognizable as federal officials. The older of the two, a man with gray hair and intense eyes, stepped forward. "Ms. Reyes, I'm Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense David Harrison, and this is Colonel Robert Martinez from the Army Medical Command. We'd like to speak with you if you have a few minutes." Jordan looked at Margaret, who nodded encouragingly, then back at the 2 men. "Of course." "Ms. Reyes," Harrison began, "we understand that you provided medical assistance during yesterday's training accident at Fort Davidson." "Yes, sir," Jordan replied, wondering if she should ask for a lawyer. "We also understand that you did so without official authorization and at some personal risk." Yes, sir. Harrison and Colonel Martinez exchanged a look that Jordan couldn't interpret. Ms. Reyes, Colonel Martinez said, we've reviewed the medical reports from yesterday's incident. The base medical personnel credit your actions with significantly improving patient outcomes. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez specifically noted that your triage decisions and clinical interventions were exactly what the situation required. Jordan didn't know how to respond to this, so she remained silent. Harrison reached into his briefcase and withdrew a thick envelope. Ms. Reyes, on behalf of the Secretary of Defense and the United States Army, I have been authorized to offer you a position as a civilian contractor with the Army Medical Research and Development Command. Jordan blinked, certain she had misunderstood. I'm sorry, what? We are offering you a position developing and implementing mass-casualty protocols for military medical personnel, Colonel Martinez explained. Your experience yesterday demonstrated exactly the kind of clinical judgment and crisis management skills we need. Harrison handed her the envelope. The details are all in here, including salary information and benefits. The position would be based at Walter Reed, with opportunities for deployment to train medical personnel in forward operating areas. Jordan stared at the envelope, her mind reeling. You're offering me a job? We are, Harrison confirmed. Your actions yesterday demonstrated courage, competence, and the kind of rapid decision-making ability that saves lives in crisis situations. Those are exactly the qualities we look for in our civilian medical contractors. Colonel Martinez stepped forward. Ms. Reyes, there's something else. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a small blue box. By order of the Secretary of Defense, you are being awarded the Department of Defense Medal for exceptional civilian service in recognition of your actions during the Fort Davidson training accident. Jordan opened the box with trembling hands. Inside was a bronze medal on a red, white, and blue ribbon, with an accompanying certificate signed by the Secretary of Defense. The citation reads, for exceptional courage and professional competence in providing life-saving medical care during a military training accident, demonstrating the highest standards of civilian service to BIA. Military personnel. Colonel Martinez read from a card. Jordan looked up at the two men, then at Margaret, who was smiling with tears in her eyes. I don't understand. Yesterday I was told I violated security protocols. Today, I'm being given a medal? Ms. Reyes, Harrison said. Sometimes the right thing to do conflicts with established procedures. Yesterday, you chose to do the right thing. 17 soldiers are alive and recovering today because you made that choice. What about the security violations? The unauthorized access? Colonel Martinez smiled. Those charges have been dismissed. Private Collins has been commended for his judgment in allowing medical personnel access to the casualty area, and you have been retroactively authorized for your presence at the scene. Jordan felt tears running down her cheeks. I don't know what to say. Say you'll consider our offer, Harrison replied. The Army needs medical professionals who can think on their feet and act decisively in crisis situations. Your actions yesterday proved that you possess those abilities in exceptional measure. Jordan looked at the envelope in her hands, then at the medal and certificate, then at Margaret, who nodded encouragingly. I'll consider it, Jordan said. I definitely need to think about this. Take your time, Colonel Martinez said. The contact information is in the packet. Call when you're ready to discuss the details. After the two men left, Jordan and Margaret sat in silence for several minutes, processing what had just happened. Well, Margaret said finally, this is certainly not how I expected this meeting to go. Jordan laughed, a sound somewhere between humor and hysteria. 24 hours ago I was folding laundry. Now I'm suspended from my job and being offered a position with the Pentagon. What are you going to do? Jordan looked at the envelope and the metal box sitting on Margaret's desk. I honestly don't know. I love working here. I love the ER, I love the team, I love the work we do. But yesterday was different. Yesterday, I felt like I was making a difference in a way I haven't felt in a long time. Does that make sense? Margaret nodded. It makes perfect sense. Sometimes, we need to be reminded why we chose this profession in the first place. Jordan picked up the metal box and opened it again, staring at the bronze medal that represented recognition for actions she had taken without thinking about recognition. I became a nurse because I wanted to help people. Yesterday, I helped people in a way I never have before. Whatever you decide, Jordan, you should be proud of what you did. You saved lives, and you did it at personal cost. That's the definition of heroism. Jordan closed the metal box and picked up the envelope. I think I need to go home and process all of this. Take your 3-day suspension, Margaret said with a smile. Think about your options. And remember that whatever you decide, you'll always have a place here if you want it. Jordan drove home through streets that looked the same as they had the day before, but felt completely different. The world had shifted around her in ways she was still trying to understand. 24 hours ago, she had been an emergency room nurse with a quiet Tuesday morning off. Now she was a suspended employee with a Defense Department medal and a job offer from the Pentagon. Her apartment still looked exactly the same. The laundry basket on the kitchen table, the scrubs still waiting to be folded. But now these mundane details felt like artifacts from a previous life, reminders of who she had been before she made the choice to cross a military barrier and spend 6 hours saving lives in a debris field. Jordan sat on her couch and opened the envelope from the Department of Defense. The job offer was impressive. A significant salary increase, full federal benefits, opportunities for travel and advanced training. The chance to develop protocols that could save military lives around the world. It was the kind of career opportunity that most nurses could only dream about. But it would mean leaving St. Mary's, leaving the team she had worked with for 8 years, leaving the familiar rhythms and relationships of the emergency department that had been her professional home for so long. Jordan set the job offer aside and opened the metal box again. The bronze medal was heavier than she had expected, its weight speaking to the significance of what she had accomplished. The ribbon was crisp and new, the colors bright and official. But what struck her most was the inscription on the back. For exceptional civilian service. Civilian service. She had never thought of herself as serving anything larger than her immediate patients in her hospital. But yesterday, for 6 hours, she had served something bigger. The principle that human suffering should be addressed, regardless of protocols or procedures or proper authorization. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The caller ID showed her mother's number. Jordan, honey, I just saw the news about the accident at the base. Are you okay? Jordan realized that in all the chaos of the past 24 hours, she hadn't called her family. I'm fine, Mom. Actually, I was there yesterday. I helped treat some of the wounded soldiers. You were there? How did that happen? Jordan found herself telling the whole story. The explosions, the decision to cross the barrier, the 6 hours of working in the debris field, the suspension from the hospital, the Pentagon officials with their job offer and medal. Oh, honey, her mother said when Jordan finished. I'm so proud of you. Your father would have been proud too. Jordan's father had been a paramedic, killed in a car accident while responding to an emergency call when Jordan was 15. His death had been part of what drove her toward emergency medicine, toward a profession where she could continue his work of helping people in their worst moments. What do you think I should do, Mom? I think you should do whatever feels right to you. You've never been the kind of person who could ignore suffering, even when it was inconvenient or difficult or against the rules. That's who you are, and yesterday you got recognized for it. After her mother hung up, Jordan sat in the gathering darkness of her apartment and thought about who she was and who she wanted to be. She had built a good life at St. Mary's, with colleagues she respected and patients she cared about and work that mattered on a daily basis. But yesterday had shown her possibilities she had never considered. The chance to work on a larger scale, to develop protocols that could save lives in situations she had never imagined, to use her skills in service of something bigger than her individual career. The decision, when it came, wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was more like a gradual recognition of something she already knew but hadn't been ready to admit. She had crossed that barrier yesterday, not just physically but professionally, moving from someone who followed established procedures to someone who was willing to make her own decisions about what needed to be done. Jordan called the number on the Pentagon letterhead the next morning. Colonel Martinez, This is Jordan Reyes. I'd like to discuss the position you offered me. Ms. Reyes, I'm glad to hear from you. What questions do you have? I want to understand exactly what this position would involve, Jordan said. The offer mentions developing mass casualty protocols and training medical personnel. Can you be more specific? Colonel Martinez's voice took on an enthusiastic tone. Absolutely. The position would involve several components. First, you would work with our research teams at Walter Reed to analyze current battlefield medical protocols and identify areas for improvement. Your experience yesterday showed us gaps in our current training, particularly around civilian medical integration during mass casualty events. Jordan listened carefully, taking notes on a pad she had grabbed from her kitchen counter. Second, Martinez continued, you would help develop new training curricula for military medics and field hospitals. We want to incorporate the kind of rapid triage and stabilization techniques you demonstrated at Fort Davidson. And the deployment opportunities you mentioned? We have ongoing medical training missions in various locations around the world. Places where our medical personnel are working with limited resources, similar to what you experienced yesterday. Your job would be to observe current practices and implement improved protocols. Jordan felt a flutter of excitement mixed with apprehension. The scope of the work was far beyond anything she had imagined when she crossed that military barrier 2 days ago. Colonel Martinez, can I ask you something? Directly? Of course. Why me? I'm sure there are military nurses with more experience in these kinds of situations. There was a pause before Martinez answered. Ms. Reyes, military medical personnel are trained to work within established command structures and protocols. What you did Tuesday showed a different kind of thinking, the ability to assess a situation and take appropriate action without waiting for authorization. That's exactly what we need in someone developing new protocols. When would you need an answer? Take your time. This is a significant decision, but I will say that we're hoping to fill this position within the next month, so if you're interested, sooner would be better than later. After hanging up, Jordan walked to her window and looked out toward Fort Davidson. The smoke was gone now, the debris likely cleared away, the training area probably already being rebuilt. But the memory of those 6 hours remained vivid. The weight of medical equipment in her hands, the focused intensity of making life or death decisions, the satisfaction of seeing patients stabilize under her care. She thought about her conversation with her mother, about her father's commitment to helping people regardless of personal cost. She thought about Margaret's words, about being reminded why they became nurses in the first place. She prayed. Thought about the 17 soldiers who were alive today because she had chosen to act rather than follow protocols. The phone call to Margaret was harder than the one to Colonel Martinez. Jordan, how are you processing everything? I think I've made a decision, Margaret. And I wanted to tell you personally before I made it official. Margaret's silence told Jordan that she already knew what that decision was. I'm going to take the position with the Army Medical Research Command, Jordan said. It feels like the right next step for me. I'm going to miss you terribly, Margaret said, and Jordan could hear the emotion in her voice. But I'm also incredibly proud of you. What you did Tuesday, and what you're doing now, it takes courage. I'm scared, Jordan admitted. This is so far outside my comfort zone. The best opportunities usually are. When do you start? I haven't worked out all the details yet, but probably within the next few weeks. Well, you'll always have a place here if you change your mind. And I expect regular updates on how you're changing the world. Jordan's last 2 days of suspension passed in a blur of paperwork and phone calls. She had to complete security clearance applications, medical examinations, and what seemed like endless forms documenting her education, experience, and personal history. The bureaucracy of transitioning from civilian hospital nurse to Defense Department contractor was staggering, but Jordan found herself energized by the process, rather than daunted. On Friday morning, she returned to St. Mary's to work her final shifts and say goodbye to colleagues who had become family over 8 years. The emergency department felt both familiar and strange, like visiting a childhood home after moving away. The rhythms were the same, the equipment was the same. Even many of the patients seemed to have the same complaints she had been treating for years. But Jordan found herself viewing everything through the lens of her new perspective. thinking about how these familiar processes might translate to field hospitals or forward operating bases. Dr. Rodriguez, the ER attending who had trained Jordan when she first started at St. Mary's, pulled her aside during a quiet moment. "I heard about your new job," he said. "Congratulations." "Thank you. It's going to be quite a change." "Jordan, I want you to know that in 8 years of working with you, I have never seen you back down from a difficult case or a challenging situation. You have the best clinical instincts of any nurse I've worked with." Jordan felt tears threatening. "That means a lot, coming from you. Whatever they have you doing at the Pentagon, they're lucky to get you. Just remember that your real strength isn't in following protocols, it's in knowing when to break them." Jordan's farewell party was held in the hospital cafeteria after the night shift, with nurses, doctors, and support staff gathering to share stories and wish her well. Someone had ordered a cake decorated with both the St. Mary's logo and the Army Medical Command insignia, a visual representation of the transition she was making. Standing in front of her colleagues, Jordan felt the weight of the moment. These were people who had taught her, supported her, worked alongside her through countless emergencies and quiet moments. They had celebrated her successes and helped her through her failures. Leaving them felt like leaving a part of herself behind. "I want to thank all of you for 8 incredible years," Jordan began, her voice slightly shaky. "You've made me a better nurse and a better person. What happened at Fort Davidson this week started with training I received here, working with all of you." She paused, looking around at faces that had become so familiar. "I'm excited about this new opportunity, but I'm also sad to leave. This will always be home." The next Monday morning, Jordan drove through the gates of Walter Reed Medical Center for her first day as a civilian contractor with the Army Medical Research and Development Command. The facility was impressive in its scope and sophistication, with gleaming buildings and state-of-the-art equipment that made her previous workplace look almost quaint by comparison. Her new office was in a building dedicated to medical research and protocol development, sharing space with physicians, researchers, and military officers from around the world. Jordan's immediate supervisor was Dr. Sarah Kim, a former Army surgeon who had transitioned to research after completing multiple deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq. "Welcome to MRDC," Dr. Kim said, showing Jordan around the facility. "I've read the reports from Fort Davidson. Impressive work." "Thank you. I'm still processing everything that's happened." "That's normal. The transition from clinical practice to research and development can be jarring. But your clinical background is exactly what we need here." Dr. Kim led Jordan through laboratories where researchers were testing new medical equipment, training facilities where military medics practiced advanced techniques, and conference rooms where protocols were developed and refined. "Your first project," Dr. Kim explained, "will be working with a team to develop improved triage protocols for mass-casualty situations. We want to incorporate the kind of rapid assessment and decision-making you demonstrated at Fort Davidson into our standard training." Jordan felt a thrill of excitement. "What kind of timeline are we looking at?" "We're hoping to have preliminary protocols ready for testing within 6 months, with full implementation within a year. It's ambitious, but the need is real." Jordan's first weeks at Walter Reed were intense and exhilarating. She worked with teams of physicians, researchers, and experienced military medical personnel to analyze current mass casualty protocols and identify areas for improvement. Her civilian hospital experience provided a different perspective from the military medical approach, and she found that her colleagues valued her input in ways that surprised her. The work was intellectually challenging in a way that clinical nursing rarely was. Instead of responding to individual emergencies, Jordan was helping to develop systems that could improve outcomes for thousands of casualties across multiple scenarios. She found herself learning about military logistics, resource allocation, and strategic medical planning, topics she had never considered during her years in the emergency department. 3 months into her new position, Jordan received her first deployment assignment, a 2-week training mission to a forward operating base in Eastern Europe, where she would observe current medical practices and implement improved protocols developed by her team. The night before her departure, Jordan sat in her apartment, now mostly packed and ready for her move closer to Walter Reed. She had kept the medal and certificate from her actions at Fort Davidson on her mantle, visible reminders of the moment when her life had changed direction. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. "Ms. Reyes, this is Staff Sergeant Rodriguez from Fort Davidson. I hope you remember me." "Of course I remember you. How are you doing?" "I'm doing well, ma'am. I wanted to call because I heard through channels that you took the job with MRDC. I did. It's been an incredible opportunity. Ma'am, I wanted you to know that the protocols you've been working on, they're already making a difference. We've implemented some of the preliminary triage guidelines in our training exercises, and our response times have improved significantly." Jordan felt a wave of satisfaction. "That's wonderful to hear." "There's something else, ma'am. Corporal Patterson, the soldier with the broken arm from the accident, he asked me to call you. He wanted you to know that he's back on full duty, and he credits the care you provided with his complete recovery. Please tell him I'm glad to hear that." "Will do, ma'am. And Ms. Reyes, thank you again for what you did that day. It meant more than you probably realize." After Rodriguez hung up, Jordan walked to her window and looked out toward the distant lights of the Capitol. Somewhere in the sprawling complex of government buildings and military installations, decisions were being made that would affect military medical care around the world. And now, for the first time in her career, she was part of those decisions. The next morning, Jordan boarded a military transport plane for her first deployment, carrying with her new protocols developed by her team and the experience gained from that chaotic afternoon at Fort Davidson. As the plane lifted off, she thought about the path that had brought her here, from a quiet Tuesday morning folding laundry to a career developing medical protocols that could save lives around the world. She thought about the 17 soldiers from that training accident, about the choices she had made without thinking about consequences, about the ways that doing the right thing could sometimes lead to unexpected opportunities. She thought about her father, about following his example of serving others regardless of personal cost. The deployment was everything Jordan had hoped for, and more challenging than she had expected. The forward operating base was a study in organized chaos, with medical personnel managing a constant flow of training injuries, occupational health issues, and the occasional real emergency. Jordan spent her days observing current practices, identifying inefficiencies, and working with base medical staff to implement improved protocols. The work was physically and emotionally demanding. She was operating with limited resources in an environment that was simultaneously highly structured and completely unpredictable. But it was also deeply satisfying in a way that reminded her of those 6 hours at Fort Davidson. She was using her skills and experience to make a direct, measurable difference in people's lives. On her last day at the base, the commanding medical officer called Jordan into his office. "Ms. Reyes, I wanted to personally thank you for your work here. The protocols you've implemented have improved our response times and patient outcomes measurably." "Thank you, sir. It's been an honor to work with your team." "I understand you have more deployments scheduled?" "Yes, sir. We're hoping to refine these protocols based on observations from multiple environments." The officer leaned back in his chair. "Ms. Reyes, in my 20 years of military medical service, I've worked with a lot of contractors and civilian consultants. Most of them come in with theories and leave with reports. You came in with practical solutions and left us with tools we can actually use." Jordan felt a deep sense of satisfaction. "That was the goal, sir. What you're doing, it matters. I hope you know that." Flying back to Walter Reed, Jordan reflected on how much her life had changed in the past year. She had gone from working individual emergencies in a hospital setting to developing systems that could impact medical care on a global scale. She had traded the familiar rhythms of civilian nursing for the uncertainty and opportunity of military contracting. But the core of what she did remained the same, helping people in their moments of greatest need, using her skills and training to improve outcomes, making decisions based on what was right rather than what was convenient or being authorized. Back at Walter Reed, Jordan's team was eager to hear about her deployment experiences and incorporate her observations into their ongoing protocol development. The work continued to evolve, with new challenges and opportunities arising regularly. 6 months after her first deployment, Jordan received a call from Margaret at St. Mary's Hospital. "Jordan, how are you adjusting to your new life?" "I love it, Margaret. It's challenging in ways I never expected, but incredibly rewarding." "I have some news that might interest you. We're implementing new mass casualty protocols here at St. Mary's, based on guidelines developed by the Army Medical Research Command." Jordan smiled. "Are they working well?" "They're excellent. Much more efficient than our old procedures." The ER staff is very impressed with the clarity and practicality of the new guidelines. "I'm glad to hear that." "Jordan, did you know that you helped develop these protocols?" "I might have had some input on them," Jordan said, grinning. "Well, your input is making a difference here. We had a multi-vehicle accident last week, and the new triage protocols helped us manage 7 casualties, much more effectively than we could have with our old procedures." After Margaret hung up, Jordan sat in her office at Walter Reed and thought about the strange circle her career had taken. The protocols she was developing for military use were now helping civilian medical personnel provide better care. The skills she had learned in civilian emergency medicine were improving military medical outcomes. The boundaries between military and civilian medical care were more fluid than she had ever realized. A year after leaving St. Mary's, Jordan received another medal, this one for exceptional service as a civilian contractor. The ceremony was held at the Pentagon, with senior military and civilian officials recognizing the contributions of contractors who had made significant impacts on military readiness and effectiveness. Standing in the Pentagon auditorium, Jordan thought about the path that had brought her there. It had started with a simple inability to ignore suffering, with the recognition that sometimes doing the right thing meant breaking the rules. It had continued with a willingness to take risks, to step outside her comfort zone, to accept opportunities that were far beyond anything she had imagined for herself. But most importantly, it had been driven by the same motivation that had led her to become a nurse in the first place. The desire to help people, to use her skills and training in service of something larger than herself, to make a difference in the world. After the ceremony, Jordan drove past Fort Davidson on her way home. The base looked peaceful in the afternoon sunlight, with no visible signs of the chaos that had consumed it on that Tuesday morning more than a year ago. But Jordan knew that somewhere on that base, medical personnel were training with protocols she had helped develop, preparing for emergencies with techniques that had been refined based on her experiences. She thought about the 17 soldiers from that training accident, about Patterson with his broken arm, and Garcia with her leg wound, and all the others whose names she had learned during those intense 6 hours. She hoped they were well, hoped they were serving successfully, hoped they never had cause to remember that afternoon when a civilian nurse had crossed a military barrier to help them. But most of all, Jordan felt grateful. Grateful for the training that had prepared her to act in that moment of crisis. Grateful for the colleagues who had supported her decision to take such a dramatic career risk. Grateful for the opportunity to continue growing and learning and contributing in ways she had never imagined possible. The sun was setting as Jordan pulled into her driveway, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded her of that chaotic afternoon when her life had changed direction. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to develop protocols and train personnel and improve medical outcomes for military and civilian personnel around the world. But tonight, Jordan was content to sit in her living room and remember the moment when she had chosen to cross a barrier, both literal and metaphorical, and in doing so had discovered possibilities for service and impact that she never could have imagined while folding laundry on a quiet Tuesday morning. The medal from Fort Davidson still sat on her mantel, a reminder of the day when doing the right thing had led to consequences both challenging and rewarding. Next to it now sat her contractor service medal, recognition for the work she had accomplished in the year since leading civilian nursing. But Jordan knew that the real measure of her success wasn't in medals or ceremonies or official recognition. It was in the protocols that were saving lives, the training that was improving medical outcomes, the systems that were working more efficiently because she had been willing to step outside her comfort zone and accept the challenge of something completely new. As she prepared for bed, Jordan thought about her father, about his commitment to serving others regardless of personal cost. She thought about the 17 soldiers whose lives had been improved by her willingness to act when action was needed. She thought about the countless future casualties who would receive better care because of the protocol she was developing. And she knew that she had found her calling, not in the familiar rhythms of civilian emergency nursing, but in the challenging, uncertain, constantly evolving world of military medical research and development. It was work that mattered, work that made a difference, work that honored the best traditions of the nursing profession, while pushing the boundaries of what was possible. The last thing Jordan saw before falling asleep was the medal from Fort Davidson, catching the light from her bedside lamp and reminding her that sometimes the most important moments in life came when you stopped following protocols and started following your conscience. It had been a lesson learned in smoke and chaos, paid for with suspension and uncertainty, but rewarded with opportunities beyond her wildest dreams. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new chances to serve, new opportunities to make a difference in the world. And Jordan Reyes, former civilian nurse, current military contractor, and permanent believer in doing the right thing regardless of consequences, was ready for whatever came next.